I stared at the gun pointed at my face, my hands trembling as I clutched the old photograph, the same one that had started this whole nightmare 3 weeks ago. You should have listened when I told you to leave the past buried, the man growled, his weathered face twisted with rage. Now drop the photo and step back, or I swear I'll finish what your father couldn't. My throat constricted as I glanced down at the faded image in my hands. A young woman holding a baby, her smile genuine but her eyes haunted. The words, "Forgive me," were scrawled on the back in my father's unmistakable handwriting. This photograph, this secret, had cost my father his life. And now it might cost me mine. 3 weeks earlier, I had been a different person. Someone who believed he knew his family. Someone who trusted his memories. The day after we buried my father, I found myself alone in his study, surrounded by the artifacts of his life. The cancer had taken him quickly, too quickly for proper goodbyes. Now I was left with the task of sorting through his possessions, deciding what to keep and what to discard of a life I thought I understood. The leather-bound journal was hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer, the kind of melodramatic hiding place I would have teased him about if he were still alive. Inside the journal was the photograph that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. I examined it carefully, a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, holding an infant. She looked vaguely familiar, like someone I might have met in childhood but couldn't quite place. The "Forgive me" inscription on the back made my stomach tighten. I flipped through the journal, but the pages were blank except for a series of numbers that looked like they might be coordinates or a code. "What were you hiding, Dad?" I whispered to the empty room. My mother found me there, still holding the photograph. "Michael, dinner's ready," she said, her voice still carrying the flatness of grief. Then she saw what I was holding, and her expression changed instantly. "Where did you get that?" I held it up. "It was in Dad's desk." "Who is she, Mom?" "And the baby?" She crossed the room with surprising speed and snatched the photograph from my hand. "It's nothing. Just someone your father knew before we met." Her hands were shaking. "Some things are better left in the past, Michael. Your father would have wanted it that way." Before I could protest, she had crumpled the photograph and thrown it into the wastebasket. At dinner, she acted as if nothing had happened, but her eyes kept darting to the doorway, as if she expected someone to burst in at any moment. That night, after she went to bed, I retrieved the photograph, smoothed it out, and studied it again. Something about the woman's eyes troubled me. They were so familiar. And what had my father done that needed forgiveness? I decided to start with the basics. The photograph paper was old, probably from the late 80s or early 90s. I scanned it and ran it through a facial recognition search online, but came up empty. Next, I examined the background of the image, a porch with distinctive railings and a partial view of a street sign. With some digital enhancement, I could make out elm, but nothing else. 2 days later, as I was preparing to return to my apartment in Chicago, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Your father made his choice. The secrets died with him. For your mother's sake, leave it alone." I showed it to my mother, whose face drained of color. "It's probably just a prank," she said, too quickly. "Throw it away, Michael." "Mom, what aren't you telling me? What choice did Dad make?" "Your father was a good man," she said firmly. "That's all you need to know." But the defensiveness in her voice only strengthened my resolve. That night, I told her I was returning to Chicago, but instead checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. Whatever secret my father had kept, it was here in Oakwood, and I was going to find it. I spent the next day in the county records office, searching for anything connected to my father's past. According to every official document, James Harrison had been born in Cincinnati, moved to Oakwood after college, married my mother, and lived an unremarkable but respectable life as an accountant. No scandals, no mysteries. But as I dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. There were gaps in his employment history. His college records showed him graduating a year later than he had always claimed. And strangest of all, I could find no record of him before age 18. No birth certificate, no school records, nothing. Who was James Harrison before he became my father? The breakthrough came when I found a small notation in his college application, a reference from a Dr. Thomas Whitaker, Pine Creek Youth Center. A quick search revealed that Pine Creek wasn't a school or community center as I had assumed. It was a juvenile detention facility that had closed in the late 80s. My father had been in juvenile detention? For what crime? And why had he never mentioned this part of his past? As I left the records office, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The driver seemed to be watching me, but when I approached, he quickly drove away. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. That evening, my motel room was broken into. Nothing was taken, but my father's journal was moved, left conspicuously open on the bed. The message was clear. Someone knew what I was doing and wanted me to stop. Instead of being deterred, I became more determined. The next morning, I drove to Pine Creek, now an abandoned complex of buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. As I photographed the exterior through the fence, an elderly groundskeeper approached. "Place has been closed for 30 years, he said. "Nothing to see." I showed him a picture of my father. "Did you work here when this man was a resident?" His name was James Harrison. The old man's eyes narrowed. Never heard that name before. He turned to leave, then hesitated. But that face, we had a kid who looked like that. Called himself Jamie Harkins back then. Mean little bastard at first, but he straightened out. One of our success stories. What was he in for? The groundskeeper shrugged. "Don't know. Those records are sealed. But whatever it was, must have been serious. He was here for 3 years. As he walked away, he called over his shoulder, "If I were you, I'd let sleeping dogs lie. Some pasts ain't worth digging up." Jamie Harkins. The name echoed in my head as I drove back to town. My father had changed his identity. But why? At the local library, I searched newspaper archives for any mention of Jamie Harkins. There was nothing in the crime reports, but I found something unexpected in the social pages, a grainy photograph of a high school dance from 1989. In the background, barely visible, was a young man who could have been my father, standing next to a pretty girl. The caption listed several names, including Jamie Harkins and Ellie Westwood. Ellie Westwood. Could she be the woman in the photograph? A search for Ellie Westwood from Oakwood yielded nothing current, but I found an obituary from 1992. Eleanor, Ellie Westwood, 21, died unexpectedly. The date would have been right around when my parents married. The obituary mentioned she was survived by her parents and a daughter, Emma, but gave no father's name for the child. A daughter. The baby in the photograph? I was so absorbed in my discoveries that I didn't notice the black sedan until it pulled up beside me in the library parking lot. The window rolled down, revealing a man in his 50s with cold, assessing eyes. "Michael Harrison?" he asked. I nodded warily. "Get in. We need to talk about your father." "Who are you?" "Someone who knows the truth. Someone who knows what your father did." Against my better judgment, I got into the car. The man introduced himself only as Miller. "Your father wasn't who you think he was," Miller said as we drove. "The man you knew as James Harrison was created in 1990. Before that, he was Jamie Harkins, a troubled kid from the wrong side of town who got mixed up in something very dangerous." "What kind of trouble?" Miller's expression was grim. "The kind that gets people killed. Your father witnessed something he shouldn't have. A murder committed by Calvin Westwood, Ellie's father, and one of the most powerful men in the county at the time. The woman in the photograph, that was Ellie? And the baby?" Miller nodded. "Ellie and your half-sister, Emma. Your father and Ellie were high school sweethearts. When she got pregnant, her father was furious. Threatened to kill your dad if he didn't disappear. But he didn't disappear? No, he stuck around, tried to do right by Ellie. That's when he witnessed Calvin killing a business rival. Calvin gave him a choice: testify and Ellie and the baby would suffer, or enter witness protection and never contact them again. The pieces were falling into place. So he chose to leave them. He had no choice. The feds gave him a new identity, moved him to Cincinnati. He was supposed to stay away from Oakwood forever. But he came back." Miller's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. 3 years later, after Ellie died, supposedly of an overdose, though many suspected Calvin, your father returned to try to get custody of Emma. That's when he met your mother. What happened to Emma? Calvin sent her away. No one knows where. Your father spent years searching for her, but Calvin had too much power, too many connections. We had arrived at a small, isolated cabin by a lake. Miller parked and turned to me. "This was your father's safe house. He bought it under another name. This is where he kept everything he gathered on Calvin Westwood over the years." Inside, the cabin was sparse but neat. Miller led me to a hidden compartment under the floorboards. Inside was a metal box containing newspaper clippings, photographs, and a tape recorder. "Your father never stopped looking for Emma," Miller explained as I examined the contents. "He believed Calvin had hidden her somewhere to punish him. The last few years, he got close, Too close. I think that's what got him killed. I looked up sharply. Killed. My father died of cancer. Miller's expression was pitying. Did he? Or was that just what the doctors were paid to tell you? Calvin has people everywhere. Doctors, cops, judges. My mind reeled. Could my father's sudden illness have been something else? Poison? I remembered how rapidly he had declined, how the doctors had seemed surprised by the progression. Who are you in all this? I finally asked Miller. I was your father's handler in witness protection. I retired years ago, but James, kept in touch. He called me 2 months before he died, said he'd finally found Emma. I stared at the photograph of the woman and baby. My father's first family. A sister I never knew existed. Why are you telling me all this now? Because Calvin Westwood is dying. Cancer, ironically. But he's still dangerous. Maybe more dangerous, knowing his time is limited. Your father wanted you to know the truth, but he also wanted to protect you and your mother. Now I'm afraid you've stirred up the past, and Calvin's people are watching. What should I do? If you're smart? Nothing. Go back to Chicago. Forget what you've learned. But I couldn't do that. Not now. And if I want to find my sister? Miller handed me a piece of paper with an address in Colorado. This is where your father thought she might be. But be careful. Calvin's reach is long. I returned to my motel to find my mother waiting in my room, her face drawn with fear and anger. What are you doing, Michael? I got a call from Calvin Westwood's lawyer. They're threatening a restraining order. Mom, did you know? About Ellie and Emma? About Dad being in witness protection. She sank onto the bed, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. Not at first. Your father told me everything after we were married. He was still hoping to find Emma then. Why didn't you tell me? We agreed it was safer for you not to know. Calvin Westwood threatened to kill you if your father ever tried to contact Emma again. Her eyes filled with tears. Your father loved you so much, Michael. He gave up searching for Emma to keep you safe. But he hadn't given up, I realized. He just kept his search secret, even from my mother. I need to find her, Mom. She's my sister. Calvin Westwood is a monster, my mother whispered. He killed Ellie when she tried to find your father. He'll kill you too. The next morning, I boarded a flight to Colorado. My mother's warnings echoed in my head, but I couldn't turn back now. The address Miller had given me led to his small horse ranch outside Denver. As I approached the main house, a woman in her early 30s emerged onto the porch. She had my father's eyes. Emma, I called. She froze, her hand moving to her waistband where I glimpsed a gun. Who are you? How did you find me? My name is Michael Harrison. I think you're my sister. Her expression shifted from suspicion to shock. Harrison? Are you Jamie's son? James Harrison was my father. He died 3 weeks ago. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You look like him. She gestured for me to come inside. I've been expecting someone to find me eventually. I just thought it would be him, or my grandfather's men. Inside, Emma told me her story. How her grandfather had sent her to a series of boarding schools and kept her isolated. How she'd run away at 18 and changed her name. How she'd always known her mother hadn't died of an overdose. I found letters, she explained. My mother had hidden them before she died. Letters from Jamie, your father, begging her to run away with him, saying he had evidence against my grandfather. Do you still have these letters? She nodded and retrieved a small box from a bookshelf. Inside were a dozen letters and another photograph, this one of my father as a young man, his arm around Ellie, both of them laughing. I never knew him, Emma said quietly, but I wanted to. Every birthday, I hoped he would find me. He tried, I told her. He never stopped looking. We spent hours talking, piecing together the fragments of our shared history. As night fell, Emma insisted I stay at the ranch. It's not safe for you to be in a hotel. If my grandfather's men followed you. Around midnight, the sound of breaking glass woke me. Emma was already in the hallway, gun drawn. Someone's in the house, she whispered. Go out the back window. My truck keys are on the hook. Go. I'm not leaving you. This isn't your fight. But before either of us could move, a man appeared at the end of the hallway, his gun trained on us. I recognized him immediately, the driver of the black sedan that had followed me in Oakwood. Well, this is convenient, he said coldly. Both of Jamie's brats in one place. The old man will be pleased. Emma's gun was steady. Tell my grandfather he can go to hell. Oh, you'll tell him yourself. He wants to see you both before he dies. What happened next was a blur. Emma fired, hitting the man in the shoulder. He staggered but returned fire as we ducked into a bedroom. The bullet grazed my arm, sending searing pain through my body. Emma pushed me toward the window. Go. Now. This time I obeyed, crashing through the screen and rolling onto the ground outside. I sprinted for the truck, the sound of more gunshots echoing behind me. As I fumbled with the keys, Emma emerged from the house, exchanging fire with our pursuer. Drive, she yelled, jumping into the passenger seat. We sped down the dirt road, the black sedan appearing in our rearview mirror moments later. For miles we raced through the darkness, trying to lose them on the winding country roads. We need to get to town, Emma said, pressing a cloth to a wound on her leg. Find the police. No, I argued. If Calvin has the reach Miller described, the police could be compromised. Then where? I thought of the evidence my father had gathered. We go back. To Oakwood. We end this where it started. 20 hours and 3 stolen cars later, we crossed the Oakwood town line. My arm throbbed, and Emma's leg wound needed proper medical attention, but we had no choice but to push forward. We drove directly to Calvin Westwood's estate, a sprawling mansion set back from the road, surrounded by security. We'll never get in there, Emma said, her face pale from pain and exhaustion. We don't need to, I replied, pulling out my phone. We just need to get his attention. I called every news outlet in the region, identifying myself as James Harrison's son and claiming to have evidence of Calvin Westwood's involvement in multiple murders. Within an hour, news vans had gathered outside the estate gates. He'll kill us for this, Emma whispered. No, I said. He wants to die with his secrets intact. Now he has to deal with us. An hour later, we received a text from an unknown number. Back entrance. Come alone or the evidence goes public. It was a trap, obviously, but we had no choice. We approached the service entrance of the estate, where a security guard escorted us through the gardens to a pool house. Inside, an elderly man sat in a wheelchair, oxygen tubes in his nostrils, a blanket over his legs. Despite his frail appearance, his eyes burned with malevolence. So, Calvin Westwood said, his voice a dry rasp. Jamie's children, come to dig up the past. A past you tried to bury, Emma replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Along with my mother. Your mother was weak, Calvin sneered. She chose that criminal over her family. My father wasn't a criminal, I said. He was a witness to your crimes. Calvin laughed, the sound turning into a hacking cough. When he recovered, he gestured to a guard, who handed him a gun. And now history repeats itself. Jamie's children have discovered things they shouldn't know. It's too late, I said. The evidence is already with journalists. Kill us, and everything comes out. What evidence? Calvin demanded. Jamie had nothing concrete, just theories and coincidences. I pulled out my father's photograph, the one of Ellie and baby Emma with "Forgive me" written on the back. He had this, and he had DNA tests proving Emma is his daughter. And most importantly, he had your confession. Calvin's face contorted. What confession? I took out my phone and played the recording I'd found in my father's safe house. A conversation between Calvin and my father from just months before his death. You killed her, Calvin. You killed your own daughter because she was going to run away with me. She was going to ruin everything, bringing shame on this family with her bastard child and her white trash boyfriend. I gave her a choice, give up the baby or give up you. She chose you, so they both had to go. But you didn't manage to kill Emma. A mistake I've regretted for 30 years. Calvin's face had gone ashen as his own voice filled the room. The gun in his hand trembled. That recording won't hold up in court, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, Emma said. But combined with the letters my mother left, the evidence Dad gathered, and the testimony of the nurse who's ready to admit you bribed him to administer poison instead of chemotherapy to my father. It's enough. Calvin's eyes darted between us, the calculation visible on his face. Then, with surprising speed for someone so ill, he raised the gun, not at us, but at his own head. One of his guards lunged forward, but it was too late. 2 months later, Emma and I stood at our father's grave. The media frenzy had died down, though the story of Calvin Westwood's crimes and suicide had made national headlines. His empire had crumbled, his associates scrambling to make deals with prosecutors. My mother had finally shared the full truth with me. How my father had fought his cancer while secretly continuing his search for Emma. How he had finally obtained proof of Calvin's crimes just weeks before his death. He wanted to protect you, she said. He thought he had more time. Emma placed a photograph on our father's headstone. The one of her and Ellie, but with the words, "Forgive me," crossed out and replaced with, "I found her." He never got to meet you, I said quietly. Emma smiled through her tears. But he never gave up looking. And he made sure we would find each other. As we walked away from the cemetery, the weight of secrets finally lifted from our family. I realized that my father had given us both a second chance. Emma to know her family, and me to understand the true measure of the man who had raised me. The man who had sacrificed one family to protect another, and who had spent his life trying to make that right. Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. Sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to healing. And sometimes, a faded photograph and a father's love can bridge even the deepest divides. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.